I have lived through the 60s twice now. I'm older and I am wiser. I celebrated another birthday about 2 weeks ago. I turned 71 and I lived through my 60s and I turned 70 last year. But I'm talking about the other 60s. And this kind of came about because I'm on a board and we do a ladies retreat, and our theme was happy, joyous, and free, as you can see my t-shirt, and Groovy Sisters was the theme, and we went with a hippie theme, and it was so much fun because I grew up a lot of my formative years in the 60s, and we were talking about it, and I told them, I've lived through my 60s twice. So I thought it would be a fun video to kind of talk about the 60s. There's a lot of talk about people that are concerned about the way things are today. You know, the wars, the shootings, the, protest, all of that sort of stuff. Well, the 60s, they were pretty tumultuous. Matter of fact, I found this statement, and I'm going to have to use some notes because this is some facts. It said, the 1960s was one of the most tumultuous and divided decades in world history. Era was marked with civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, anti-war protest, counter-cultural movements, and the emerging generation gap. Does that sound familiar? Huh. Okay. Us baby boomers, there are 76.4 million of us. That's a lot. And then Gen X, these are just some facts. There are 65.2 million Gen Xers. And typically the Gen Xers are like 1965 to the early 1980s. So, the 60s. Well, we were already in the Cold War. The Cold War is the threat of nuclear war from the Soviet Union. And we were in the Vietnam conflict. And it was the same type of thing because northern Vietnam was communist and southern Vietnam was free, and the United States supported them, and there was this conflict trying to keep North Vietnam from taking over South Vietnam. And so Vietnam War was officially, it began in 1955 as a conflict, and it ended in 1975. So it was the span of 20 years. Now, what, I think it officially became a war a little bit later. Okay, I'm going to get into this. In 1961, the DNA genetic code was broken. Barbie got a boyfriend. Ken doll came out in 61. And I didn't have a Ken doll. My Barbie liked G.I. Joe, like them bad boys even then. The Russians sent a first man into space in a spaceship. Wow. And I remember this spaceship, this journey into space war, and they sent up a monkey, and then Russia beat us to actual human being in a spaceship. So that was pretty phenomenal. In 1962, the Beatles came onto the scene. Well, wow. That caused quite a stir because they had long hair. Now, we had the crew cuts and the clean cut guys, and the Beatles had long hair. Now, today, the Beatles would be considered clean cut. I think it's kind of funny because it's all relative to where you are in society. Also in 62, the Rolling Stones and the first James Bond movie came out. And they put pull tabs on aluminum Coke cans. So that was very interesting. Now, another very quite history, you'll find some of these stuff in history, was the Cuban War crisis started. It was a 13-day confrontation toward the end of 1962. And all this threat, there was like 6 missiles pointed at the United States. Soviet Union had put them there. And I remember it, and I can remember in grade school, we did bomb threats, and we got under our desk, and we were told to put our head down and cover it up. I think today we would have been just under there crunched up kissing our asses goodbye, because if there'd really been these were atomic bombs they were talking about. Well, it wouldn't have mattered. That desk wouldn't have protected me from nothing. All it did was create a lot of fear. And so, but I remember doing those drills and the big threat, and it lasted 13 days, but it carried on through the 60s of the threat of the atomic bomb. In 63, Martin Luther King led a march to the Capitol, through the Capitol, probably the mall. What do they call it? National Mall. Been there, done that. And they walked up through there, and on the steps, he delivered his famous speech, "I have a dream." Marilyn Monroe was found dead. There was a legislation passed, the equal pay for equal work for women. That was pretty interesting. And then President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. And that was in November of 1963. And I was in the 4th grade, and I was in a classroom, and I remember a teacher came in, and she was upset and crying. And she told the other teacher, and the other teacher started crying. And then it was a little bit before they told us that the President of the United States had been assassinated and died. And we, and what, so much of this that made it so, I think, devastating was this stuff was on TV. We'd never seen this stuff on TV. And so I remember sitting in the cafeteria watching his service. They put all of us kids in rows, and they had a little TV up there, and we watched it. In 1964, the Mustang was introduced. Beatlemania was in full swing. I mean, it was nuts about the Beatles. They were on the Ed Sullivan Show. I can remember seeing them on the Ed Sullivan Show. And of course, we got introduced to Elvis on the Ed Sullivan Show. And they would not show him gyrating, because that gyrating, his pelvic was too whatever. I think, whoa, Michael Jackson grabbing his crotch. So, and then the seat belts started being put in vehicles, probably because of that muscle car, the Mustang. In 1965, the Medicare bill was passed. 32,000 people make a 54-mile freedom march, led, and they had some, what do they call them? Peaceful protests, where these people would march, and they were peaceful. They, the one that Martin Luther King did, it was a peaceful march in protest. So they did this one. And then Malcolm X was assassinated. Bob Dylan went electric with an electric guitar. And then the birth control pill became legal in the United States. Wow, this was the start of the sexual revolution. I say today that the sexual revolution was the period of time between the birth pill was readily available until AIDS came onto the scene in the early 80s. So that it was actually, the birth control pill was actually approved in 1960, but it didn't become like widely readily available in the United States until 65. In 1966, Star Trek was released. And then there was also the University of Texas clock tower shooting happened. And because I'm from this area, I remember that. I had to look that up because it's not, as I was doing my research for this, it was not like something that just came up. And it was in 1966. And let's see, what's the stats on that? 14 people were killed, students, and 31 wounded. And that was, it was on a Texas university. In 1967, they did the first heart transplant. The Rolling Stones magazine was founded, and Elvis Presley got married. How about that? The hippie movement started. There was this summer of love, and the Pink Floyd and the Doors put out their first albums. So 1967 was kind of a little bit of a turning point when things really got bad, real bad in the 60s. And that's because in 68, Robert Kennedy was assassinated, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and then the riots started. They were no longer peaceful demonstrations. They were riots and looting and, people getting killed. And it was, and then you take and you sprinkle in all of those, the riots about Vietnam and what made it, and again, every night on the news, because they would send live reporters to Vietnam to report the war, and we were seeing it on the nightly news. We were seeing war. We were things that were never publicized before, like World War I, II, Korean War, none of that. The reports were what you read in the paper, which would be days, weeks old. Vietnam War, it was on our TV at night, And then 1969, man walked on the moon. Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and he jumped off the little thing, and he first landed his foot on the surface of the moon, and he said, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." That just really didn't quite have a clue the far reach that one thing would do for space travel. And of course with Star Trek and all of that, and then I don't even know when the Jetsons were popular, but so many things on that old Star Trek. They had a flip phone, they had a computer screen, they had like FaceTime, all of that sort of stuff that we do today, was on that. I'm waiting for the robot maid that the Jetsons have to come clean my house and cook for me. I'm waiting for them to invent that. So, and then of course, probably one of the most known things about the 60s, along with assassinations and Civil War stuff. Civil War, listen to me. Yeah, I guess they were, in a way, was Woodstock. Now, I was 16 years old during Woodstock. I went from being 6 years old to 16 years old in the 60s. And it was a 3-day music extravaganza. And there's different numbers. Some people say 400,000, some people say 500,000. And they went to this cow farm outside of Woodstock, New York. And they had these they had 32 acts performed. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jefferson Airplane, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Joe Cocker, The Who, The Grateful Dead. I watched the Grammys last night and they scanned over to the Grateful Dead. And they're old. They're really old. Like I'm not, you know. And during this time, of course, you know, with the hippies, it was all about love and drugs and free sex and all of that. And, you know, there were reports about Woodstock that everybody was high on wacky weed or LSD or all of those type of drugs that they were on. And, you know, this is the counter-cultural. We, you know, I guess, and they were probably older than me, these, you know, people, hippies. They didn't want the same life that our parents had. They rebelled against conformity, and they wanted equal rights, and they wanted the freedoms and that sort of stuff, you know. And it was about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And their saying was, turn on, tune in, and drop out. They said groovy and far out and make love, not war. And all those protests against the Vietnam War, women's rights, gay rights, civil rights, you know. And then during this time, there was people dying from using drugs because they were mixing LSD and amphetamines with a tranquilizer. And, you know, they were calling it killer for kicks. Does this stuff sound familiar? I mean, does it? So then, and I looked this up too because I remember Kent State, and it happened in May in 1970. And what happened was there was these protesters at a university, and the I guess the police or crowd control or whoever shot into the crowd and killed 4 students and 13. They shot 13 students and 4 of them died. So, you know, there's so much of a correlation between some of this stuff and what's going on in our world today. The fentanyl crises, the, you know, the DEI and you know, that equality for people. And it was pretty interesting. But it was funny, back to this board that I'm on, and us doing this ladies retreat, you know, and we had our meeting at they kept asking me about all the stuff about the hippies, because our skit was about hippies, and I kept telling them, yeah, I've survived the 60s twice. And the second set of 60s I survived has its own tumultuous, it's a hard word to say, times for me, you know. It's like coming to terms with getting older, and it's almost a bittersweet time. You come into your own, you're more comfortable with yourself. I don't know, just more wisdom, more outspoken, more confident, not caring as much about what people think and that sort of thing. And that just kind of happens with age. And yet, you go through a grieving process of losing your youth. And there's this bittersweet of knowing that, especially in the later years of 60s and turning 70, of knowing that I have less time in front of me than what I've lived. A lot less time. Because when you're 50 years old, you've lived, or 45, you've lived half of your life as a woman. So you got your whole other half of your life to live. But at 70, 20, 30 years, who knows? So part of this part of my second 60s is the expectations of society on me as an older woman. I'm not supposed to wear my hair longer, stop wearing sleeveless tops, no mini skirts, be conservative. I guess we're supposed to wear, polyester and floaty tops and have our hair all chopped off. And I think the Golden Bachelor kind of broke that stereotype, because those women that were on there, they look younger than what they were. They were wearing all kinds of stuff, and they're playing pickleball, and they got muscles, and they're, vibrant, and men, they're living life. So I think some of that stereotype has been broken. The fact that, in the United States, youth is revered. I lived overseas. I lived in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and their older women are revered. They think youth is like, it's kind of funny to me, but, and there's other societies that think that. Fashion caters to the young. I mean, I can't wear heels anymore, and I can wear a turtleneck if it's loose enough. I worked in the salon for years, and I can remember my customers talking about not wearing anything that wasn't comfortable, or they couldn't wear heels anymore, and just the complaints of, growing older is not for sissies, is what I heard. I think about that now, because, man, if it's not comfortable, that's how I clean out my closet. If I put it on and it's not comfortable and it doesn't make it out the door, it goes in the giveaway box. Because if it's not comfortable, I'm not going to wear it. And trying to stay fashionable as a more mature woman. And I could remember skinny jeans, thank goodness they've kind of gone out of style. Trying to find a comfortable pair of skinny jeans. I think it's an oxymoron. There is no such thing. Because, I would buy a bigger pair of skinny jeans so they would be more comfortable, but then they weren't skinny jeans anymore. So it's, these struggles we go through as we get older. And no, I don't wear heels anymore because I really can't. It hurt my knees and my hips. But thank goodness, what did I say, the heart transplant that happened in whatever year that was, thank goodness for transplants, because I have two. I got my hip replaced and I got my knee replaced, and kind of got a new lease on life, to be able to walk and to do the things. And I'd gotten to where I couldn't hardly work out, and you lose a lot of muscle really quick when you're older, and you got to keep up that strength training to keep your muscles. I can get the flu and lose half of my muscle mass in a week, being in the bed. And then post-menopause. Oh, what a struggle. Talk about struggle. You've got to have a lot of courage and be really strong to live post-menopause. Everything dries up, and then you get this little mustache. And since I can't wax my lip, me and the tweezers are real close. And, just so many different things. But the good stuff that has come is I am wiser. And I am more confident. I'm more relaxed. Things that I used to worry about, such a waste of time. I've been contemplating about, doing a video of the 10 things I would tell my younger self. Stay tuned. So I retired I haven't been retired 2 years yet. I started a new business. I started a YouTube channel. During my 60s, I got fired at age 63, and then 2 years later, they come crawling back and begged me to come back at 65. That's another YouTube video. So it's been a journey, and I really like the concept of, the journey is the destination. And so many things do come full circle. When you start looking at fashion, I knew when bell bottoms came back around for the second time, I'd gotten old. But I don't really like to think about that I'm old. I'm mature. This is mature blonde hair. I grew my color off in the 60s. Accomplished a lot of things in the 60s. My 60s were good. Both 60s. And it was fun to reminisce. It was fun to talk about those times. I remember one time in the salon, we were talking, and the girl next to me was working, and I was working on this lady, and we were talking about hippies, and she said, I wonder what happened to all those hippies. And the girl working next to me said, one of them's working on your hair. So, yeah, the hippies. Lots of free love, and it really wasn't. We paid a price for some of that. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like what I share here, subscribe. Hit like. Tell me what you remember about the 60s. I know a lot of my demographics are women that are in their 60s. I have a few Gen Xers coming around. Y'all are coming around. Most of my friends are Gen Xers. Most of the people I hang out with are younger than me because most of the people think I'm their age. And I'm really grateful. My Italian blood has served me well, and I haven't aged quite as quickly as some of my friends. I go to my school reunion, and it's like, oh, who are all these old people? Anyway, please subscribe. And if you like what you've watched here, watch my next video. And I will see you next time. And remember, as always, to be you on purpose at any age.